We arrived now at the second tier of the transgenerational transmission. The first was large groups. The third one are individuals, and in between are the families. And I'd like to introduce to you John Bowlby, Murrey Bowen, Ivan Boszhormenyi Nagy, Bert Hellinger, and Alejandro Jodorowsky, who all of them have contributed a lot to understanding the dynamic of families. We can conceive of families as trees in a forest, and the forest is the large group. So now, from now on, we zoom in into the trees, into the family trees. I'll remind you of the statement of Steffi Wagner. Pain travels through generations of families until someone is willing to feel it. Family carry suffering accumulated from many generations because suffering, if not addressed consciously and transformed in wisdom, is suffering which has not found its resolution. And family relationships are very complicated, carrying many layers, some visible, yet most of them invisible, hidden. For an outsider, it is difficult to figure out the family dynamic, as the members have mostly a long history with each other. The communication between family members relies mostly on context. What someone means is conveyed through poses, tone of voice, language, gestures, a look out of the corner of the eye. An outsider cannot comprehend why someone feels suddenly offended or hurt or storms angrily out of the room. So an adult grew up from the child she has been. The child was the child of 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 16 great-grandparents, and is blood related to siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and is related also to the people marriages added to the family. The deceased ancestors, like grandparents, great-grandparents, belong also to the family tree. As the family tree is a unit of the large group, the ancestors are automatically the large group's ancestors. In some families, the ancestors are more present, they are remembered, photographs are kept, and stories about them are told. If the family is ashamed of some of them, they are pushed into silence and secrecy, and will see that this plays a very big role in the transgenerational transmissions. In our Western culture, ancestors are not conceived as participating in the life of their descendants, as invisible living entities. Yet, if we study families, we will discover the overwhelming influence the ancestors exert on their living descendants. And families also live under a canvas tent. If a stone is thrown at the family tent, members react. Think of the Italian vendetta, the Muslim honor killings. Think of Romeo and Juliet. These are blatant examples, but in everyday life it is not rare that this happens. the offense is not easily forgotten, and the pole of the family canvas then is the family identity. So, large groups are composed of families. The families are composed of individuals, and the family is a bridge between the individuals and the large group. What happens in the large group percolates in the whole family tree and influences the individuals, and what happens with the individual influences the family tree. The family carries the narratives of the large group, as also its language, values, customs, costumes, heroes, religious beliefs, celebrations, commemorations. The family is a part, a fractal, a unit of the large group. And the family is composed of children, siblings, parents, aunts, uncles, and so on, from both parental sides. And you can visualize it as a tree, as a family tree. The family tree is a complex system of multiple generations, long-standing, fluctuating, dynamic relationship. Alliances, enmities, grudges, grievances, loyalties, passions, rivalries, murders, envy, hatred, incest, admiration, emulation, lust, lies, treachery, blackmail. Everything human relationships entail, you find in family trees. How the large groups transmit to the family tree is obvious. The family is an integral part of the large group. It undergoes what the large group is going through. But how does a family transmit its legacy to the child? In this part of the lecture, I'll present a couple of models of how parents transmit to their children the essence of their experiences, of their achievements, defeats, joys, and pains. The models have been worked out by family and group therapists. I'll present to you three fathers of family therapy: John Bowlby, Murrey Bowen, and Ivan Boszhormenyi Nagy. Two people who work out of the box: Bert Hellinger, Alejandro Jodorowsky, and one shaman, Dan van Kampenhout. The first one I would like to present to you is John Bowlby. He was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and he is the father of the attachment theory. So let me tell you a bit more about John Bowlby, because it is important to understand who he was in order to understand his whole theory. So, as already said, he was a British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. And he was born into a family belonging to nobility. His father was Sir Anthony Alfred Bowlby, 1st Baronet, a British Army officer and surgeon. In his social class at that times, the consensus for raising children was that parental attention and display of affection would spoil the child. Hence, John and his 5 siblings were left with 1 nanny and 3 nursemaids and lived in a separate nursery in the house. One of the nursemaids, Minnie, was especially warm and loving and a true mother figure for John and his siblings. Yet, when John was 4, Minnie left the family. For John, Minnie's departure was devastating. And with 7, he was sent to a boarding school, as was the custom in families of his social status. He wrote later, "I wouldn't send a dog away to boarding school at age 7. Bowlby studied first psychology, afterwards medicine, becoming a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. During World War II, he worked in London at the Child Guidance Clinic in Canonbury and in Cambridge with children evacuated from Canonbury, hence separated from their families because of the air raids. This gave him the opportunity to continue his research on separation, which he had started before the war. He became also very interested in 44 delinquent children, whom he categorized into 6 types: normal, depressed, circular, hyperthymic, affectionless, and schizoid. His main finding was that the delinquent children, characterized as affectionless, had experienced complete and prolonged separation before the age of 5. Mind you, at that time in our Western culture, it was unknown and even difficult to conceive that a little child can form emotional attachments, that they can feel the loss of a caregiver, that they can grieve, and that the mother, as a primary caregiver, had an important role to play in the forming of the personality of the child. It was John Bowlby who fostered this understanding. If we think how much more understanding we have gained since then about the human psyche, about our own development from infant to adulthood, about the deeper, rather hidden part of our relationships, and so on, then we have learned the last 75 years quite a lot. And these are one of the peoples whom John Bowlby has influenced a lot. Anna Freud, Donald Winnicott, Dorothy Burlingham, René Spitz, and there were many more. The attitude of the mother, of the parents, of the primal caregiver is decisive to the way how safe the child feels. And how safe the child feels is decisive for all relationships the child will have as an adult, unless it is brought into consciousness and transformed. This is a basis of Bowlby's understanding. And I'll present to you the different ways a child attaches himself to the primal caregiver, and this depends on the attitude of the caregiver towards the child. Secure attachment. The primary caregiver is present, aware of the child's needs, and capable to respond to them with sensitivity and skill. The child is wanted, cherished, seen as precious, as deserving care, comfort, understanding, encouragement, as also boundaries. And the child trusts the mother, father, caregiver to be there whenever the child needs. The child is at ease with intimacy, with closeness. The child feels safe to explore increasingly bigger areas of his/her room, space, environment, knowing that if it falls, injures itself, or has a spat with another child, it can run to the caregiver and will be hugged, comforted, taken care of. The child experiences a stable, reliable, safe base to return to. As an adult, a child who grew up securely attached to her primary caregiver is capable to form healthy, functional, trusting relationships, is not worrying to be abandoned. It can give and receive affection, is comfortable with closeness and intimacy. To be securely attached makes more stress resistant, more open to explore possibilities outside the comfort zone. If a child is left alone for a longer time, due to whatever reason, being born too early and having to be put in an incubator, an illness of the mother, being left with a rather indifferent nanny, it will feel abandoned, rejected, and existentially insecure, not knowing when and if the caregiver will return. Children have another perception of time than adults. 1 hour can feel endless. Children are hungry, thirsty, are often ill with fever, cold, cramps. They need attention, affection, comfort, to be held, to be soothed. If this is lacking, the child becomes anxious, clinging, desperate. The child is then extremely distressed when left alone, and extremely difficult to comfort when the caregiver returns. As an adult, the individual will be hyper-vigilant and anxious to be rejected or abandoned, will be clingy, emotionally too dependent on others, craving to be reassured, validated. If the primary caregiver is aloof to the needs of the child, distant, cold, does not give attention and affection, does not comfort and soothe the child when the child is in distress, due to physical discomfort or emotional need to be held, talked to, played with, the child withdraws. She learns that there is nobody there to take care, that she is on its own. The child suppresses its needs and discomfort when it feels physically unwell. It has given up to seek help and closeness. As adult, the individual suppresses her feelings and is often not even aware what she feels, keeps emotional distance from others, is uncomfortable with closeness and intimacy, avoids both dependency on others and others dependent on her. The individual's life is one of independence, but underneath there is an unfulfilled yearning for closeness and belonging. Disorganized attachment style. The behavior of the primary caregiver is erratic, unpredictable. One time caring, another time distant, indifferent, and another time abusive, even violent. The caregiver is sometimes a source of comfort, other times a source of fear and distress. This behavior confuses and frightens the child. It cannot develop either a coherent way of relating to the caregiver nor a strategy to stabilize the contact. The child responds too with erratic behavior. For example, approaching the caregiver but then stopping in its tracks and freezing, or running away. As adult, he craves closeness and fears it in equal measure because of the vulnerability closeness involves, leading to contradictory behavior in romantic relationships, friendships, and even at work. These adults oscillate between clinginess and withdrawal, attracting and rejecting. In order to understand better how the attachment of the infant to the primary caregivers continues throughout life, Bowlby introduced the concept of cognitive internal working models, similar to the core cognitive schemas, but referring specifically to relationships. The core cognitive schemas were first worked out by Jean Piaget in his theory of cognitive development, later by Jeffrey Young in his schema therapy, and by Aaron Beck in his cognitive behavioral therapy. The little child does not have the conceptual tools to identify his core beliefs and to name them. They are unconscious, they are implicit. And so is the attachment style. Very simplified, the core beliefs are I am lovable or I am not worth to be loved, I am capable or I can't, and the world is a safe place or the world is unsafe. Bowlby zoomed into the crucial experiences leading to the child's core beliefs, experiences related to the parenting style of primary caregivers for the child. Now imagine a young mother who lives in the middle of a war, or hating her husband, or having to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. How much attention and affection can she give? Imagine a father who is absent because he fights in a war, or has to work under a bullying boss, or who has been beaten up by his own father when a little child himself, who becomes physically violent when drunk. How much attention and affection can he give to his child? Yet we can't live without attaching ourselves emotionally to our primary caregiver. The attachment styles are relevant to identify and understand because, similar with the core beliefs, they are the implicit templates for all relationships the individual will have for the rest of his adult life, unless brought to daily consciousness and intentionally transformed. Similar to the core cognitive schemas, they are the foundation on which the personality builds itself. Yet the dysfunctional attachment styles are not immutable. The dysfunctional primary caregivers mostly do not neglect or abuse a child out of intentional maliciousness. Most often, they are themselves emotionally handicapped because of the legacies they themselves have received from their caregivers and the choices they made in their life, dictated by their own attachment style of which they are not conscious. Bowlby's legacy. Bowlby revolutionized child psychology and psychotherapy. His attachment theory is a foundational in the attachment-based psychotherapy and a cornerstone in the development of emotionally focused therapy for couples, as also in the development of trauma-informed therapy. Bowlby's theory has profoundly influenced parental practices, early childhood education, and child care policies worldwide. His advocacy for keeping young children in close proximity to caregivers has shaped recommendations for parental leave, institutional care, and the age at which children start school. Murrey Bowen. He lived between 1913 and 1990. And Bowen was an American psychiatrist who is a founder of systemic therapy or family therapy. For him, family forms a system, most and foremost an emotional system, in which the members are interconnected and interdependent. And he is important for the concept of self-differentiation and the technique of the Genogram. Self-differentiation. Self-differentiation is the ability to distinguish between one's own thoughts and feelings and those of others, to maintain one's own identity while remaining emotionally connected, and to act thoughtfully rather than reactively in the context of family and social relationships. The definition resembles Carl Gustav Jung's concept of individuation, although there are also big differences. Jung uses for the process of individuation concepts like shadow, anima, animus, which are rather far from Bowen's approach. Yet the aim is similar. The level of self-differentiation is decisive for the capacity of a person to be emotionally and intellectually autonomous, to set boundaries, to pursue, even against odds, her own talents and interests, to establish meaningful relationships, and to navigate as skillfully as possible daunting situations. The level of self-differentiation plays a decisive role also in the choice of a life partner. Usually, couples have more or less the same level of self-differentiation. And the same is valid for many activities and groups people feel attracted to join. A family can have people with different levels of self-differentiation. Bowen ascribes a level of differentiation to family relationships in childhood and adolescence. Also, family relationships are no doubt important. In my experience, parents with low self-differentiation can have one child or more children with a higher level of self-differentiation than themselves. My conviction is also that we do not come into this world as an unwritten slate. We bring with us experiences from previous lives which can confer us more wisdom than the family we were born into. Besides, more people who are not family can fulfill the role of fostering self-differentiation in a child or adolescent. A teacher at school may recognize the intelligence and talent of a pupil and put effort to encourage these qualities, thus changing the destiny of the child. Many other people can fulfill this role. A distant aunt or uncle, even neighbors or parents of a good friend of the child. Yet without any intervention and without a conscious, sustained effort to rise to a higher level of self-differentiation, the degree of self-differentiation stays stable throughout life. Connecting this concept with Bowlby's attachment styles, My observation is that a securely attached child, as also an avoidant, anxious attached child, have more chances to grow into a high self-differentiated individual than a clinging, anxious, and a disorganized attached child. What are the effects of low and high self-differentiation? Effects of low self-differentiation. 1. Emotional reactivity, fusion, dysfunctional patterns of interaction. People with low self-differentiation fuse easily, losing their sense of self and getting over-involved. Or they keep a too big emotional distance, or are rigid in interactions. The results are power struggles, deep-held grudges, cut-offs, and chaos. 2. Higher incidence of chronic anxiety and other psychological problems. 3. Impaired conflict resolution, leading to either aggression or to completely suppressing and concealing the vexing topics. Effects of high self-differentiation. High self-differentiation leads to emotional stability and calmness in the system. Clear communication between family members. Adequate decision-making. Balance between closeness and autonomy. And high self-differentiation offers a refuge against anxiety during challenging times. Self-differentiation is present not only in individuals and families, but also in societies. So, what is a genogram? A genogram is a tool to map a family over multiple generations, and it uses geometrical symbols and lines. So, it needs the names of the family members, and then it uses squares, triangles, circles, horizontal lines, slashes through a horizontal line, which mean divorce, dotted line, which means adopted, zigzag line when the relationship is conflictual, diagonal line through relationships which are cut off, and so on. And next to a name, more information can be placed, like the date of birth and death, but also important life events like immigration, medical and psychological issues, and so on. And so most of my colleagues who work with Genogram do the Genogram themselves, so they ask all the information and then they build the Genogram, or they do it together with a client. And I prefer to leave the client to do it after I explain the technique. And just by explaining to clients the principle, the image the client comes with is telling. And I'll give you two examples. One is a bit long, but I find it interesting. So one of the drawing was of a half Dutch and half Indonesian young woman with a huge family, especially from the Indonesian father side. The father, an Indonesian man, had been a member of CNIL, the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army, the military Dutch force in their colony Indonesia. Since its inception in 1800, CNIL was involved in many wars against indigenous groups. Started by indigenous groups against the Dutch colonizers. During World War II, Indonesia was occupied by Japan, who put many KNIL members in murderous concentration camps. After World War II, Indonesian people started in 1945 a war of independence which lasted for 4 years, whereby KNIL fought on the side of the Dutch. Indonesia declared independence in 1949. KNIL was dismantled and many KNIL members took refuge in the Netherlands, where they were poorly treated. And the father of my client had to be interned in a concentration camp, Japanese concentration camp, where he had to do exhausting physical work, suffer beatings, humiliations, and lack of food. While in the Netherlands, he was treated as a second-rate citizen. In her drawing, my client was completely squeezed between siblings and cousins. Family members were piled up one on top of the other. There were many premature deaths in the generation of her parents and grandparents. Many deaths were due to physical violence. The women had unusual many miscarriages. The drawing was full of double-slashed lines, zigzag lines, and diagonal lines through the relationships. One glance at the drawing made clear that these were people embroiled in wars, insurgencies, and serious familial conflicts, in which the children had no possibility for a secure attachment and no space to differentiate. Another example. Another genogram belonged to a man who drew the genogram with a linear, following the rules to perfection. He told me later that 2 uncles of his had been for many years in prison for a serious offense. The perfection of the drawing was meant to cover up the imperfection of some of the family members. In a certain way, the 4th tier of cognitive psychology, the acceptance and commitment therapy, fosters self-differentiation by focusing on values and strengths and not on symptoms as expressions of suffering. Bowen stated in many of his writings, in different wordings, that the roots of the most severe human problems are generations deep. I mentioned this at the beginning of the lecture. And I would like to end the chapter on Murray Bowen with a quote of his, another quote, which is prophetic. The crisis of society will recur and recur with increasing intensity for decades to come. Man created the environmental crisis by being the kind of creature he is. The environment is part of man. Change will require a change in the basic nature of man. And man's track record for that kind of thing has not been good. I believe man is moving into crisis of unparalleled proportions, that the crisis will be different than those he has faced before, that they will come with increasing frequency for several decades. The type of man who survives that will be the one who can live in better harmony with nature. Ivan Boszhormenyi, Nagy. was a Hungarian-American psychiatrist, one of the founders of the field of family therapy. And he is a creator of the contextual therapy. Boszhormenyi Nagy uses all approaches already existing, as also Bowen's Genogram, and adds something completely new: the ethical dimension of human relationships. And I cannot emphasize enough how profound and revolutionary this addition was and still is. Boszhormenyi Nagy came from a 5 generations family of judges, lawyers, magistrates, for whom ethics and law were at the center of their worldview, education, and career. He grew up with people for whom justice was the highest value. At the same time, being born in 1920, he grew up in the very conservative, anti-intellectual, and anti-Semitic Hungary under Miklos Horthy. In November 1940, when Ivan was 20, Hungary joined Hitler's Nazi Germany. In September 1944, the Soviet army, on its way to Germany, crossed the Hungarian border, and when leaving Hungary, left behind a satellite communist country. The political turmoil, transgressions from all sides, and misuses of power made Ivan, then a teaching assistant at the University of Budapest Neuroscience Clinic, to leave Hungary, first for Salzburg in Austria, where he worked for the United Nations International Refugee Organization, and in 1952 Chicago in the US. And by the way, I mentioned that there are many Kosovo and many Balkans, and Hungary is one of them. I'll not enter in details about Hungary's history, but it is very tumultuous, bloody, and with deep running and unsolved grudges. Boszhormenyi Nagy was known for having a humanistic outlook, a deep sense of justice and fairness, commitment to dialogue, a global and intergenerational perspective, and a high level of personal integrity. He also was known for being loyal to his roots and being very generous. He stayed all his life in contact with Hungary. He gave courses, lectures, trained Hungarian psychotherapists, often pro bono. It is this man, with this background, who introduced ethics into the psychotherapeutic discourse. Ethics is a touchstone for the assessment of the level of evolution of an individual, and the assessment is based on the quality of his relationships. According to Boszhormenyi Nagy, the relationship domain plays out on 4 dimensions. First dimension are the facts: gender, genetic input, physical health, ethno-cultural background, socioeconomic status, basic historical facts, events in a person's life. 2. Individual psychology, the domain of all individual psychotherapies. 3. Systemic aspects, the domain of classic family therapies, concerning rules, power dynamic, alignments, triangles, and so on. And 4, relational ethics. Even Boszhormenyi called his approach contextual because it is a comprehensive model which integrates individual, psychological, interpersonal, existential, and intergenerational dimensions of individual and family. The contribution of contextual therapy concerns mainly the 4th dimension of relational reality, the relational ethics. The focus is therefore on connectedness, caring, reciprocity, loyalty, fairness, accountability, trustworthiness, legacy within and between generations. The core of relational ethics in the contextual therapy rests on 2 postulates. 1. All family members bear consequences of each other's actions and inactions. 2. The quality of one's relationships depends on the responsible consideration of others' legitimate interests and claims. And it rests on 3 concepts. 1. The ledger of merits and debts. 2. Entitlement. And 3. Hidden loyalties. And we will encounter this in the work of Bert Hellinger and Jodorowsky. The ledger of merits and debts refers to the balance or imbalance in the give and take within relationships. Examples of merit: parental sacrifices, taking care of the children when they are sick, even if it means sleepless nights, working multiple jobs to ensure a good education for the children, support during crisis. An adult child supports emotionally and financially a parent going through a serious illness. Mentorship and guidance. An older sibling offers consistently guidance and support to a younger siblings. Acts of kindness and thoughtfulness. Gestures of care in a marriage. And examples of debts: neglect or abandonment, betrayal or infidelity, unfulfilled promises which cause expectation and then disappointment, feelings of being let down, emotional unavailability, everything which damages a relationship. What are the consequences of accumulating debts and merits? Consequences of accumulating debts: emotional distress and resentment, stress, anxiety, and depression, erosion of trust, leading to mistrust, isolation, weakened family bonds. Now, accumulated debts can be passed down to subsequent generations. This is part of intergenerational transmission. Accumulated debts lead to hostile tension and or cut-offs, conflict and estrangement, and have a negative impact on self-worth. Consequences of accumulating merits: enhanced emotional well-being. Merits lead to feelings of gratitude, satisfaction, a sense of achievement and purpose. strengthened trust and loyalty within relationships. The family members who consistently care for each other build a strong foundation for the relationship, which becomes a reliable refuge and support in challenging times. Consistent supportive actions are likely to be passed down through generations. Children who experience fairness and care are more likely to behave in the same way with their own families. Healthy intergenerational relationships, healthy intergenerational transmission. Marriage fosters an easier resolution of conflicts due to underlying trust and goodwill. Positive self-identity and empowerment. Family members who give and receive support within their families feel valued and empowered, are confident, capable to form and maintain healthy relationships. They have thus a positive self-identity. Entitlement. There are two types of entitlement, a constructive and a destructive. And the constructive entitlement happens when a family member gives what a family member gives is acknowledged, valued, and rewarded. This enables the family member to trust others and to seek the fulfillment of his needs in appropriate ways. Destructive entitlement happens when a family member has been mistreated, neglected, or exploited, and he may feel justified in harming family and others who are not family, and even society at large. Loyalty. Loyalty, both conscious and unconscious, is not merely psychological, social, or religious. It is rooted in the ethical dimension of relationships, together with justice, fairness, and reciprocity in giving and receiving. And there are hidden loyalties or invisible loyalties, which are powerful, mostly unconscious bonds of obligation to the present family, often passed down through generations. They can be a support or a hindrance in the life of family members. Invisible loyalties manifest negatively as difficulties in setting boundaries and blockage in the process of self-differentiation. Repeating dysfunctional patterns through many generations. Chronic self-sacrifice and guilt. The legacy of Ivan Boszhormenyi Nagy. He has profoundly impacted generations of family therapists worldwide and even beyond the sphere of psychotherapy. By introducing ethics in the field of the family dynamic, he contributed to the recognition of relational ethics as a fundamental force binding couples, families, and multiple generations. He showed how injustices and unresolved conflicts in one generation repeat themselves and harm the next generation. Therapists trained in contextual therapy, as also in other forms of therapy, learn to recognize and renegotiate unfair patterns by facilitating dialogue related to fair contributions and justice, by addressing destructive entitlement and dysfunctional invisible loyalties, by exploring multi-generational legacies and their impact on current dynamics, and by promoting personal accountability. Even Boszhormenyi Nagy's contribution has expanded tremendously the scope of family therapy, which now includes the impact of social, political, and economic realities on families and the ethical responsibility towards future generations. Last but not least, as I stated before, the family is a fulcrum between the large group and the individual. It is a fractal. It expands what happens in the large group into the personal sphere, into the personal life. On its turn, individuals influence, sometimes strongly, the family and, by extension, the large group, and by further extension, beyond the large group. Individuals, families, nations are not separated. They function on a continuum, on countless feedback loops. Even Boszhormenyi Nagy postulate all family members bear consequences of each other's actions and inactions, is valid for the totality of our human family. John Bowlby, Murrey, Bowen, and even Boszhormenyi Nagy explored the psychological dimension of transgenerational transmissions. I'll present to you now two thinkers, researchers, who in their work with family legacies offer a bridge between the psychological and the spiritual approach. And they are Bert Hellinger and Alejandro Jodorowsky.